Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about something that's been sitting right under your nose for years, whether you've noticed it or not. Your behavior is a direct mirror of your psychological wounds. Now, before you start looking for ways to escape this conversation, grab your coffee, settle in, and brace yourself. You probably won't survive the next 15 minutes without feeling just a little bit uncomfortable. But don't worry, that's a good thing. It means we're about to get real. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to know where in the world you're listening from. Now, let's get comfortable, and let's get started today. We all love mirrors, don't we? Well, most of us. Some people avoid them like they're holding a curse, but let's be honest, the majority of us love the reflection they offer. But here's the thing, mirrors don't lie. They don't care if you're tired or stressed, or whether you've had a good day or bad. They reflect what's true, whether it's flattering or not. And that's where the magic, if you can call it that, happens. Our behavior is the mirror to our inner world, just like how a mirror reflects the face. You can hide from it, dress it up, change its lighting, and still, it's going to show you the truth. The actions you take, the choices you make, the way you react to others, it's all showing you what's going on beneath the surface. And I'm not talking about the day-to-day stuff we can explain away. Oh, I was tired. I had a bad day at work. I was in a bad mood. Sure, those things play a part, but when those moods become consistent patterns, there's more to it. What if I told you that the way you're showing up in the world, the way you behave toward yourself and others, is like a huge neon sign pointing directly to your unhealed wounds? Those invisible scars that you've tried to bury under layers of distractions and superficial fixes. They're there. And they're guiding you, whether you realize it or not. Let's think about it for a second. If you've ever found yourself repeatedly in the same type of situation that ends badly, be it relationships, work situations, or friendships, you're not unlucky. You're not doomed. You're simply repeating behavior patterns formed by old wounds that never got the proper care they needed. It's like a system defaulting to the same settings, every time. We create familiar chaos because it's what we know. It feels safer than the unknown. Here comes the turning point. You can keep trying to push forward, to chase a better version of yourself, but until you start looking at your actions, the way you respond to situations, the way you sabotage your success, or the way you react in relationships, it's like trying to build a house on shifting sand. It's never going to stick. Your behavior is your emotional fingerprint. The sooner you recognize it, the sooner you can start unraveling the deeper stories you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve. Your actions. They're not random. They're deeply rooted in your psychological history. Think about it. Ever wonder why you fall into toxic relationships despite swearing you'd never do it again? Or why you keep putting everyone else's needs before your own, even when you know it's draining you? These are signs of your wounds manifesting. They're trying to get your attention, like a child tugging at your sleeve, saying, "Hey, you need to take care of this." What most people don't realize about wounds is they don't heal on their own. You have to meet them head on, see them for what they are, and acknowledge that they're not the whole story of who you are. If you can do that, you're on your way to something much bigger than self-improvement. You're on your way to self-awareness, and from there, the possibility of deep, meaningful healing. Let's start breaking it down. The behavior you think is just part of who you are. It's actually the result of an emotional injury, often one you've carried for years. And just like that mirror, your actions are giving you the chance to recognize it. The real question is, are you brave enough to look? When you've spent most of your life doing the same thing, over and over again, it becomes hard to see the pattern. The day-to-day actions blend together so seamlessly that it's like you're living in an endless loop. But if you take a moment, step back, and really observe your behavior, really look at the things you've been doing, the choices you've been making, you might start to notice something that's been there all along, the patterns. And patterns, as familiar as they may feel, are rarely accidental. Our behavior is like a mirror, reflecting back to us the wounds we've left untreated for years. We think we're just navigating through life, but in reality, our actions are steering us in ways that can only be understood when we look closely at the story behind them. The story of what's been broken and what's been neglected. I used to think that repeating the same behaviors was a sign of laziness or a lack of willpower. That I was weak. Why couldn't I just move past these things? But as I started looking deeper, I realized that the repetition wasn't about a flaw in me, it was about the emotional wounds I had carried for so long. You see, when we don't address the trauma or emotional pain we've been through, our psyche creates these unconscious patterns to keep us safe. But the problem is, they don't actually make us safe in the long run. Instead, they keep us stuck in a cycle of self-sabotage, avoiding the real work that needs to be done. Take relationships, for example. How many times have you found yourself attracted to someone who treats you the same way your last partner did? Or how many times have you gotten into a situation where you end up feeling the same way you felt in a past relationship, unseen, unheard, or unloved? And when you finally realize you're repeating an old pattern, it feels like a slap in the face. Why am I doing this again, you wonder? But the truth is, it's not about the other person or the situation. It's about the wound that you haven't healed yet. It's about the part of you that believes you don't deserve better, so you unconsciously choose the people or situations that reinforce that belief. We're not as aware of our patterns as we think we are. We like to think we're making choices consciously, that we're acting from a place of full awareness. But the reality is that many of our actions are guided by invisible forces, forces that are rooted in our past traumas, in things we may not even remember. Those past experiences get stored in our bodies, in our subconscious, and we act them out over and over again without even realizing it. This is why we find ourselves stuck in the same loops. The funny thing is, these patterns aren't always negative. Sometimes, we repeat behaviors that seem positive on the surface but are actually masking a deeper wound. Maybe you find yourself always taking care of everyone around you, always trying to please others, always putting their needs before your own. On the outside, this may look like a selfless person who is constantly giving. But in reality, this behavior might be a response to an old wound, perhaps one that tells you your worth is dependent on what you can give to others, rather than who you are as a person. Maybe, deep down, you believe you're not enough as you are, so you hide behind the mask of being the helper or the fixer. The problem with this? It leaves you exhausted, resentful, and drained because you've never truly learned to give to yourself. Patterns are tricky because they feel comfortable. The brain loves familiarity, even when it's unhealthy. It's easier to stay in the same patterns because, while they might cause pain, they're a kind of pain you've learned to tolerate. The brain feels safe in that discomfort because it's known. But what happens when you start challenging those patterns? When you start looking at your behavior and asking, why do I do this, and what is this really about? For example, I used to have this habit of avoiding difficult conversations. Whether it was a tough work situation or a personal issue, I'd find every excuse to avoid confrontation. And I told myself I was just a peacekeeper, someone who didn't like conflict. But as I dug deeper, I realized that the truth was I was terrified of rejection and criticism. I was so afraid that if I spoke up, I'd be abandoned or judged. So, I would retreat, keeping my thoughts and feelings to myself, never really standing up for what I needed or wanted. The avoidance was my way of protecting myself from the pain I feared. When I finally realized the pattern, it was like someone turned on a light. I could see how it had shaped my behavior in every area of my life, from my relationships to my job. The avoidance wasn't just about staying comfortable, it was a shield, a defense mechanism against the wounds I didn't want to face. But once I saw it for what it was, I could start doing the real work, confronting the fear and learning to speak up, even when it felt uncomfortable. The point here is not to shame yourself for these patterns. We're all walking around with wounds, each of us carrying something that makes us react in certain ways. It's normal. What's not normal is pretending that these patterns don't exist. The first step toward healing is to stop running from the truth and start looking at the behavior as a reflection of what needs attention. Once you see it, you can start doing something about it. You don't have to stay stuck in the same loop forever. It's like looking in the mirror, seeing what's reflected, and saying, I see you. I know where you come from. And I'm ready to change. The thing about masks is, they're convenient. At first, they're just a way to fit in, to survive, to protect ourselves from the world's sharp edges. But over time, those masks become so much more than just a layer we put on, they become who we think we are. We start to believe that the mask is the person underneath. And that's when things get complicated. I've worn a lot of masks in my life. The, I've got everything together, mask, the, I'm always calm, mask, the, I don't need anyone, mask. I crafted them carefully over the years, smoothing out every crack, every flaw, until the face behind them became hard to recognize. These masks weren't just about fitting in. They were about survival. They were about keeping my wounds hidden from the world, and more importantly, from myself. Here's the truth, though, your wounds are always there, underneath the mask. They might be covered up, disguised, ignored, but they don't go away. And every time you put on a mask to avoid confronting them, you're making it harder to heal. Because the mask doesn't address the wound. It just hides it a little longer. I remember the first time I realized how much I relied on the, I'm fine, mask. I'd tell people everything was great, that I had everything under control, that I was just busy with life. But deep down, I was drowning in feelings of unworthiness and fear of rejection. I didn't feel like I could be my true self, not because of what others might think, but because I didn't trust my true self to be enough. So I put on the mask of confidence, of success, of everything looking picture perfect, even though I felt empty inside. It's easy to dismiss this kind of behavior as just putting your best foot forward, and in some ways, that's true. We all do it in small ways, trying to be the best version of ourselves when we don't feel like the best version is enough. But when it becomes a habit, when it's your default setting, it starts to feel like a trap. The longer you wear the mask, the more it becomes a prison. Because every time you tell yourself you're fine when you're not, every time you pretend you have it together when you don't, you're disconnecting from who you really are. This may be a small insight, but it changed everything for me. The more I took off the mask and allowed myself to be vulnerable, the more I started to understand that my behavior wasn't about being strong or perfect. It was about being real. It was about accepting my flaws and imperfections, and understanding that they didn't make me less worthy, they made me human. At first, it was terrifying. The idea of showing up as myself, without the mask, felt like a gamble. What if people didn't like the real me? What if they saw my vulnerabilities and walked away? But with time, I realized that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a bridge. It connects you to others in a way that perfection never can. And more importantly, it connects you to yourself. I started to notice how often I wore the mask in situations where I felt most vulnerable. In relationships, at work, even in social situations. I'd walk into a room, see the people around me, and immediately assess how I was being perceived. Would they think I was smart enough? Would they see me as successful? Would they find me interesting, or funny, or enough? It was exhausting. And it was all rooted in the same place, fear. Fear that I wasn't enough as I was. Fear that my true self wouldn't be accepted. Fear that if people saw the real me, they would see something broken, something unworthy of love or attention. And so, I put on the mask. The mask that said, I'm fine, even when I wasn't. The mask that said, I've got it all together, even when I was falling apart. During my own process of healing, this truth became crystal clear. Every time I removed a layer of the mask, every time I allowed myself to be seen as I truly was, wounded, imperfect, vulnerable, it felt like stepping into a new level of freedom. But not just freedom from others' judgments. Freedom from my own expectations. The ones I had imposed on myself to be something I wasn't. You see, the mask doesn't just hide your wounds from others, it hides them from yourself too. It's easy to look in the mirror and see the confident, successful version of yourself that you've created. It's harder to look past the mask and see the person who's been hurt, who's afraid, who feels unworthy. But when you do, when you allow yourself to see that person, when you stop hiding from your wounds, that's when the real work begins. The mask you wear is a reflection of the wounds you've tried to protect. It's a reflection of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve. And the longer you hold on to that mask, the longer you stay disconnected from your true self. So take it off. Slowly. Gently. It's not about perfection. It's about truth. About accepting that your wounds don't define you, but they have shaped you. And that's okay. It's the first step in healing, recognizing that who you are without the mask is enough. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all together. You just have to be real. And real? Real is where the magic happens. Emotions. We've all got them, and for the most part, we all try to control them, suppress them, or distract ourselves from them. But here's the thing, emotions don't stay hidden forever. They bubble up to the surface in ways we don't always recognize or understand. The trouble is, we're often so disconnected from the emotions we refuse to feel, that we don't even know what's happening inside us. We just know we're acting in ways we can't quite explain. Ever found yourself snapping at someone over something small? Or avoiding a conversation you know you need to have? Or feeling inexplicably down for no apparent reason? That's your emotions, pushing up through the cracks in the walls you've built around them. When we experience pain, grief, or trauma, we naturally try to avoid it. Nobody enjoys feeling hurt, angry, sad, or afraid. And while avoiding these emotions might bring temporary relief, it never works in the long run. The emotional pain doesn't go away, it just gets buried. And that buried pain starts to control us in ways we don't see. It manifests as anxiety, self-doubt, irritability, or even physical tension and pain in our bodies. It shows up in how we relate to others, and more often than not, it's the driving force behind our behavior. The tricky thing is, we don't always recognize these emotions for what they are. They can be buried so deep that they show up as inexplicable reactions. You might find yourself lashing out at a friend for canceling plans, even though deep down, you know it's not a big deal. Or maybe you overwork yourself, not because you love your job, but because you're terrified of being vulnerable enough to admit that something else is missing in your life. When we're disconnected from our emotions, it's like being in a car with a malfunctioning GPS. The destination is still there, but we keep making wrong turns, all while feeling completely lost. And because the pain is tucked away so neatly, we don't even realize we're following the wrong route. But our behavior is pointing us back to the emotional wound that's driving the bus. I used to be like this. I didn't even know why I was so tense all the time. Why I couldn't relax, even when things seemed calm on the outside. My shoulders were perpetually tight, my mind always racing, and I'd find myself losing patience over the smallest things. Then, I'd turn it inward, what's wrong with me? I'd think. Why can't I just chill out? But the truth was, I wasn't just chilling, because I had buried so many emotions from past experiences, anger, sadness, fear, that they were constantly trying to get my attention. And my reaction? I ignored them. I convinced myself that everything was fine. I was too busy to feel anything deeply, too distracted to admit that there were emotional wounds I hadn't even begun to address. When I finally faced the fact that these buried emotions were controlling my behavior, everything started to change. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always pretty, but it started with me getting honest with myself. The way I behaved wasn't just a personality trait. It was a result of emotional pain that I hadn't processed yet. And while the pain didn't magically disappear when I acknowledged it, I realized that I had more control over my reactions than I had thought. One thing that really helped me start digging deeper was learning to sit with emotions, rather than avoid them. For a long time, I thought emotions were something to be fixed, or even worse, something to overcome. But in reality, emotions are signals. They're trying to tell us something about our needs, boundaries, or the things we've been avoiding. The thing I had to understand was this: when we avoid our emotions, we avoid ourselves. We avoid the parts of us that are hurt, confused, or vulnerable. And those parts are the ones that need the most care and attention. There's a fascinating aspect of human intelligence here. The insula, a small part of the brain, is responsible for processing emotions. It helps us feel empathy and make decisions based on emotional experiences. But the thing is, the insula also lights up when we experience social rejection. That's why emotional pain is so closely tied to feelings of isolation or loneliness. It literally hurts to feel emotionally disconnected. And it's why we can't ignore those feelings for long. They affect us in ways we can't escape. So how do you start feeling your emotions instead of running from them? First, you have to create space to simply be. To not judge yourself for feeling anything. To acknowledge the discomfort instead of pushing it down or numbing it with distractions. That might sound easy, but it's probably one of the hardest things you'll ever do. When you've spent a lifetime avoiding feelings that feel overwhelming or confusing, sitting with them can feel like you're standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. But here's the thing: it's not about leaping into the unknown. It's about learning to take one step at a time, one feeling at a time. When I started to sit with the discomfort, when I stopped judging myself for feeling anxious, overwhelmed, or angry, it started to feel less terrifying. I learned that those emotions weren't here to destroy me. They were here to teach me something. That's when things really began to shift. I started understanding why I felt the way I did, and I began to recognize when my behavior was just a reflection of something I had buried. And here's the breakthrough moment: once I started to feel, really feel, my emotions, I could finally heal. Not by fixing anything, but by simply allowing myself to be human. By accepting that it was okay to feel all of it, good, bad, and everything in between. Your behavior is a mirror of your wounds because it's the only way your unconscious mind knows how to communicate them. If you're ignoring your emotions, your behavior will show you the consequences. But when you begin to face those emotions, to sit with them and understand their messages, you'll start to see your behavior shift as well. You'll start to act from a place of awareness, rather than from a place of avoidance. The first step to healing is acknowledging the emotional pain you've been running from. It won't always be easy, and it may not always feel comfortable. But the more you lean into your emotions, the more you'll learn to navigate life with clarity and authenticity. And most importantly, you'll start to recognize that your behavior, the mirror to your wounds, no longer has to control you. You know what's wild? The way we attract the same patterns over and over again, despite swearing we'll never fall into them. How many times have you found yourself in a toxic relationship, or maybe you're constantly surrounded by people who drain you, and you think, I will never do this again, only to find yourself right back in the same situation a few months later. It's like you're drawn to the exact thing you know won't work, and despite your best efforts, you end up in the same emotionally charged place again and again. Why does this happen? The patterns we attract are not random. They're not some cruel twist of fate. They are mirrors, reflecting the wounds we carry and haven't healed. The thing you think you're avoiding is often the very thing your psyche is calling you to face. But it's not just about recognizing a pattern, it's about understanding why that pattern exists in the first place and how it's connected to an old wound you've never truly processed. If you've ever been in an unhealthy relationship where you ended up feeling unseen, unappreciated, or worse, abandoned, then the pattern you're attracting isn't random. It's probably mirroring an emotional wound from your past. Maybe it's an old hurt from childhood, or a previous failed relationship where you felt like you weren't enough. And the reason you end up in the same situation is because your subconscious mind is trying to make sense of the old pain in the context of new experiences. It's like your mind is saying, okay, I didn't understand this the first time, but maybe if I try it again, I can fix it. Except, without realizing it, you're reenacting the exact same hurt. I used to think that I was just unlucky in love, that I didn't have the right kind of luck to find the right kind of person. But when I looked closer, I saw something unsettling. every time I found myself in a relationship, there was a familiar pattern. At first, everything felt exciting and new. But after a while, I'd notice the same emotional dynamics playing out. Someone would distance themselves from me emotionally, and I'd feel the need to chase, to convince them that I was worth staying for. I'd end up feeling unworthy and unloved, but I couldn't understand why I kept repeating this cycle. It wasn't the people I was attracting, it was the pattern I was carrying within myself. My old wounds, fear of abandonment, a belief that I wasn't enough, kept attracting people who mirrored that same fear. And until I recognized those patterns, I was doomed to live them out over and over again. From here on, it's not so simple. We think we want to find a solution to the problem, but often, the solution isn't outside of us, it's inside. We keep choosing the same kind of relationships, friendships, or work environments that reinforce our old wounds because, on some level, we believe we're supposed to fix the wound by living it over again. It's like we think that if we can make a different decision this time, the outcome will be different. But it's not the decision that needs to change, it's the way you see yourself in relation to those decisions. I used to think I was attracted to a certain type of person, or that my type was just flawed. But the reality was, my type was shaped by my wounds. I was subconsciously attracted to people who could affirm my belief that I wasn't enough, that I had to prove my worth to be loved. It wasn't until I did the deep work of understanding my wounds, learning to sit with that fear, that insecurity, and that need to be seen, that I started making different choices. And when I started healing those parts of myself, the patterns I had been attracting slowly began to shift. I stopped choosing people who mirrored my old wounds and started making space for relationships that mirrored my growth. The truth is, you attract what you're vibrating. If you're walking around with unhealed wounds, you're sending out an emotional frequency that will attract similar emotional frequencies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a reflection of where you are emotionally. But the key to shifting the pattern is to first identify the wound, then heal it. You can't expect to attract healthier relationships if you haven't first healed the parts of you that still feel unworthy, abandoned, or unseen. The human intelligence fact here is this: the brain's mirror neurons are responsible for our ability to empathize with others and pick up on emotional cues. These neurons are also at play when we attract people who mirror our emotional state. It's almost like your body is telling you, hey, here's someone who feels the same way you do, and in the process, you form a connection based on shared emotional experiences. But when we heal our wounds, we start sending out a different signal. We begin attracting people who can meet us at the level we've grown to. Here's another odd, off-topic fact: did you know that seahorses are the only animal where the male carries the babies? Talk about role reversal. But think about it, seahorses have evolved to break the traditional norm of how life begins. In a way, when you heal your wounds and break free from old patterns, you're evolving, too. You're changing the way you experience relationships, and ultimately, the way you experience yourself. You're not stuck with the same emotional dynamics, you can create a new story. And that's where real healing begins. It's not about fixing the other person or the situation. It's about understanding that the behavior you're attracting is just a reflection of your own emotional state. When you can look in the mirror and see your own wounds, you have the power to heal them and shift your patterns. When you start healing the parts of yourself that feel unworthy or abandoned, the relationships, the friendships, the career choices, they start changing too. Because once you understand where the pain comes from, you stop looking for the solution outside of yourself. You stop attracting the same emotional patterns, and you start attracting what's truly aligned with the healed, whole version of you. It's time we say this out loud: avoidance is one of the sneakiest forms of self-sabotage. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like the typical, don't follow through, behavior we associate with procrastination. Instead, avoidance is subtle. It's quiet. It can look like taking a break or recharging or even busy work. But underneath, it's a way of avoiding something deeper, something that's just too painful or uncomfortable to face. I'm no stranger to avoidance. In fact, I've spent years running from things I knew I needed to deal with, pretending that if I just pushed them aside, I could keep going. And I did keep going, but I also kept ignoring the emotional mess piling up behind me, until it reached a point where I couldn't pretend it wasn't there anymore. At first, avoidance looks like a solution. It's the quick fix. It's the thing that allows you to bypass the hard work of feeling your feelings or facing uncomfortable truths. It's that feeling of relief when you don't have to confront the anxiety, the fear, the shame, or the vulnerability that's been gnawing at you. But just because it's easier in the moment doesn't mean it's the right choice. For me, avoidance usually showed up in the form of busy work. I'd distract myself with projects, errands, or even social media scrolling, anything to keep my mind occupied. Anything to avoid sitting still long enough to feel the discomfort. I told myself that I was being productive, that I was getting things done, when in reality, I was just hiding from the emotional work that needed to happen. And that's the trick about avoidance: it feels productive, but it doesn't solve anything. It just keeps you stuck in the same place, never moving forward, but always pretending you're on the right track. It's like walking in circles and convincing yourself you're making progress because the ground under your feet keeps shifting. But there's a twist: avoidance doesn't just keep you stuck. It actively prevents you from healing. When you avoid facing your wounds, they don't magically disappear. Instead, they fester. They grow. They begin influencing your decisions, your reactions, your relationships in ways you don't even realize. The more you avoid something, the more it shapes your behavior, often in ways that are completely out of your control. One thing I learned from my own avoidance patterns is that emotions are like children. They can't be ignored for long. They demand attention. The more I ignored the emotional discomfort, the more it piled up, like an overflowing trash can that you're too afraid to open. But eventually, the stench becomes unbearable. And that's what happens when you keep avoiding the emotional work: it eventually catches up with you, usually in the form of a breakdown, burnout, or some kind of crisis. The hardest part of facing avoidance isn't realizing you've been doing it. It's admitting that the avoidance was a defense mechanism. That it was a way of trying to protect yourself from emotional pain that felt too overwhelming to deal with. It's not a flaw or a weakness, it's a survival tactic. But just because something helped you survive doesn't mean it's helping you live. I had to stop seeing avoidance as being lazy or being weak and start understanding it as a coping mechanism I had developed in response to deep-seated fears and wounds. Avoidance was my mind's way of saying, "This is too painful, let's push it away." But the thing is, by pushing it away, I was also pushing away my growth. Here's where it gets interesting: avoidance is often rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear of feeling vulnerable. When you avoid facing something head-on, it's often because there's a fear that the emotional pain will be too much to bear. But ironically, that avoidance keeps you stuck in the cycle of fear. The more you avoid, the more you tell yourself, "I can't handle it." And when you keep telling yourself that, you reinforce the idea that you're powerless over your emotions, that you're incapable of handling the discomfort. You can handle it. You are more resilient than you give yourself credit for. And yes, feeling your emotions, sitting with your fears, and confronting your wounds will be uncomfortable. But it's through that discomfort that you begin to heal. Think of it like this: when you avoid dealing with something, you're essentially burying it in a dark room and leaving the door locked. But the moment you open the door, the sunlight floods in, and while it may take time to clean up the mess, the room becomes livable again. You can breathe in that space once you stop avoiding it. One of the most powerful things you can do to break the cycle of avoidance is to bring awareness to it. Notice when you're avoiding something, and take a pause. Instead of diving into distraction, ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? What am I avoiding? Just the act of naming the fear or discomfort can help you take the first step toward confronting it. So, how do you stop avoiding and start healing? The first step is simple: sit with the discomfort. Give yourself permission to feel without judgment. You don't have to fix it right away or make it better. You just have to be with it. And from that space, you can start to process, to heal, and eventually, to move forward. Avoidance will always be tempting. It's natural. But when you choose to face the emotions you've been running from, you open the door to real transformation. The only way out is through. We all have that voice inside our heads, don't we? The one that pipes up just when things are going well, just when we're about to make a move, take a risk, or reach for something bigger than what we've been told we're capable of. And what does that voice say? Who do you think you are? You'll never make it. This is all going to fall apart, and you're going to look foolish. Yeah, that voice. The inner critic. The first time I really heard it, I was sitting in front of my computer, about to hit send on an email that was going to open up a new opportunity for me. And right before I clicked, this flood of negative thoughts hit me. Who do you think you are? You're not qualified. What if they think you're an imposter? What if you fail, and then everyone knows you weren't ready? I froze. And then, in an attempt to convince myself I wasn't crazy for hesitating, I closed the laptop. I let the moment slip by. And the worst part? I knew I'd never get that opportunity back. I'd missed my shot. And the voice in my head? It was smug, whispering, "I told you." The inner critic, as it turns out, is the embodiment of all the psychological wounds we carry. It's the loudest when we're about to take a step forward, right when we're on the verge of doing something brave or vulnerable. Why? Because the inner critic is terrified. It's terrified that you might prove it wrong. It's terrified that if you succeed, it won't be needed anymore. And so, it does everything in its power to stop you before you even start. It's easy to dismiss the inner critic as just negative thinking. But that voice is more than just bad vibes. It's rooted in deep psychological wounds. For me, the critic often sounded like my childhood voice, growing up in an environment where nothing was ever good enough. It echoed all the ways I was taught that I was too much or not enough, that I wasn't worthy of taking up space in the world. And it had become such a normal part of my life that I didn't even recognize it as a symptom of my emotional wounds. The inner critic is actually tied to our survival instincts. Psychologists have found that the voice is part of a deeper, protective mechanism. It's based in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. The amygdala is responsible for detecting threats and keeping us safe. But here's the twist, it doesn't differentiate between actual threats, like a bear, and emotional threats, like rejection or failure. So, when the inner critic starts warning you that you're not good enough, it's reacting like a survival instinct, telling you to avoid the potential emotional pain, even though that danger is not really life-threatening. But there is a problem, that protective mechanism ends up trapping us. Instead of helping us avoid real danger, it keeps us from reaching our potential. The more we listen to the critic, the more we stay small, stay safe, and never take the risks that lead to growth. It keeps us in the comfort zone where nothing changes, nothing grows, and nothing challenges us to become more than what we've been. When you start to recognize that the inner critic is not just some annoying voice, but a reflection of unhealed wounds, it becomes easier to start dismantling it. The voice itself is a symptom of a deeper problem, the belief that you're not enough, that you can't succeed, or that failure is too painful to face. But those beliefs, while real in the moment, are often rooted in past experiences that no longer serve you. You see, the critic's job isn't to help you, it's to keep you small. It thrives in silence, in self-doubt, in fear. It's easy to listen to the critic because it's familiar. It's like a bad friend who's always there, whispering, "I told you so," but never supporting you when you need it most. But here's the truth, that voice isn't the real you. It's an outdated part of you, born from old wounds, trying to keep you in the safe space where you don't risk being hurt. But it's not protecting you, it's holding you back. And the more you listen to it, the more it gains power. So, how do you deal with the inner critic? The first step is simple, you stop believing everything it says. Start questioning the thoughts it's feeding you. When you hear that voice telling you that you're not good enough, ask yourself, is that really true? And then ask, who's telling me that? The second step is recognizing that the inner critic isn't actually you, it's a product of the wounds you've experienced in your life. That voice might sound like your parents, an old teacher, or someone from your past who taught you that you weren't enough. But here's the real power in that: when you understand that the critic isn't really you, it becomes easier to silence it. You can acknowledge it, hear it, but not believe it. For me, one way I've started responding to the critic is by saying, "Thank you for your concern. But I've got this." It's a simple phrase, but it's a reminder that the inner critic is just a scared part of me, trying to keep me from doing something new, something challenging, something that might lead to growth. And if I'm going to grow, I need to push past that voice. The biggest step in healing the wounds that feed the critic is understanding that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy. The more you can accept yourself, flaws, imperfections, and all, the more the critic loses its grip. Perfectionism and the critic go hand in hand. But when you stop striving for perfection, you free yourself from the need for constant validation. You give yourself permission to be human. The inner critic will never completely disappear. It's an old part of you that's been with you for a long time. But you can make it quieter. You can make it less powerful. And eventually, when it speaks, you'll hear it for what it is, a relic of your past, not the truth of who you are now. So, next time you hear that voice, remind yourself, you are not that voice. You are the person who has the power to move forward, to break free, to take risks, and you don't need permission to do that. The inner critic doesn't get a say in your future anymore. If there's one thing I've learned about myself over the years, it's this: I have a strange relationship with vulnerability. The moment vulnerability knocks on my door, I'm usually the first to hide behind a pile of distractions or throw up an emotional wall. Not because I'm afraid of connection or intimacy, but because I'm terrified of what might happen if I let myself truly be seen. And that fear is a direct reflection of my wounds. Vulnerability, for me, was the thing I tried to avoid at all costs. The very idea of exposing my true self, the messy, imperfect, and at times broken parts of me, felt like a risk I wasn't willing to take. I'd go through life putting up facades, pretending everything was fine, making sure no one saw the cracks I'd carefully hidden away. I wasn't even fully aware of what I was doing. I just assumed that vulnerability was weakness, that it would make me less than in the eyes of others. But what I didn't realize was that my wounds, the ones I tried so hard to keep hidden, were the very things that needed to be healed the most. And the only way to heal them was to allow myself to be vulnerable, to stop pretending, and to open myself up to the possibility of being seen, fully, as I am. I've come to learn that vulnerability is actually one of the most courageous things you can do. It's not about being perfect or having it all together. It's about showing up with all of your flaws, your scars, and your uncertainties and saying, "This is me. Take it or leave it." It's about accepting that you don't have to be flawless to be worthy of love, connection, and respect. If you've been carrying unhealed emotional wounds, your fear of vulnerability is just a symptom of those wounds. When we're afraid to be vulnerable, we're often afraid of being rejected, judged, or abandoned. We're afraid that if people see the real us, the parts of us that have been hurt, they won't accept us. And that fear? It's deeply rooted in the experiences we've had in the past, often when we were vulnerable and got hurt. But here's the catch: the more we hide, the more we give power to that fear. The more we build walls around our hearts, the harder it becomes to experience true connection. The truth is, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the ultimate act of self-acceptance. It's saying, "I am worthy, even in my brokenness." It's about letting go of the need to be perfect and instead choosing to embrace the parts of yourself that you've been hiding. It's about trusting that even though the world might not always respond the way you want, you are enough just as you are. And when you start living from that place of self-acceptance, everything around you starts to shift. I remember the first time I let myself be vulnerable in a way that wasn't disguised as, "I've got it all under control." It was a conversation with someone close to me, where I finally admitted that I was struggling, that I didn't have everything figured out, and that I was scared. I remember feeling so raw in that moment, like I had stripped myself bare and was standing there, completely exposed. But what happened next blew me away. Instead of rejection, I was met with understanding, compassion, and support. I wasn't met with judgment, I was met with connection. That experience taught me something powerful: vulnerability is not only safe, it's essential. It's the key to authentic connection with others. It's the bridge that allows you to form real, meaningful relationships. Without vulnerability, we stay isolated in our own fears, pretending to be fine, when in reality, we're just hiding the wounds that keep us from showing up fully in our lives. Sounds great, right? Well, not quite. Vulnerability isn't just about being open with others. It's about being open with yourself. It's about giving yourself permission to feel, to express, to let the walls come down and to sit with the uncomfortable emotions that come up. It's about allowing yourself to feel sadness without rushing to fix it, to feel fear without judging yourself for it, to feel insecurity without pretending it isn't there. Because when you stop running from your emotions, when you stop numbing the pain, that's when true healing begins. And I get it. It's terrifying. It's so much easier to stay in the comfortable, familiar space of pretending, of wearing the mask, of showing up as the person you think you're supposed to be. But that's not where healing happens. Healing happens when you let yourself be messy, when you let yourself be imperfect, when you let yourself be human. And in that space of imperfection, that's where real connection can be found. Because when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you give others permission to do the same. And that's where the magic happens. There's this offbeat fact I came across that I love: wombats, those cute, burrowing marsupials, have cube-shaped poop. It's a completely random and unique fact, but I think it's kind of a metaphor for vulnerability. It's awkward, it doesn't always make sense, and it's definitely not perfect, but it's just how they are. And honestly, maybe we should all embrace our cube-shaped poop a little more. Maybe we should stop pretending we've got it all together and just let ourselves be the imperfect, vulnerable beings that we are. The truth is, vulnerability doesn't just make us human, it makes us real. And that's the most powerful thing you can be. You don't have to hide your wounds to be worthy of love. You don't have to cover up your scars to be accepted. The more you allow yourself to be vulnerable, the more you allow others to love you for who you truly are, not for the version of you that's been hiding behind the mask. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this: the world needs your vulnerability. It needs the real you, the you who isn't afraid to feel, to hurt, to heal, and to grow. Because when you show up as your true self, you give the world permission to do the same. So the next time vulnerability knocks on your door, don't run. Open the door, and let it in. Embrace it. You might just find that it's the key to unlocking the life you've always wanted. There's something so intoxicating about control, isn't there? For years, I believed that if I could just control the chaos, if I could just keep things in line, I'd be able to manage everything. People. Situations. My emotions. My life. I thought that control was the antidote to my wounds, the thing that would protect me from the uncertainty and pain that had haunted me for so long. But here's the thing about control: it's an illusion. The more you try to grip onto it, the more it slips through your fingers. And what I didn't realize until much later is that my obsessive need to control everything was actually just a reaction to my emotional wounds. You see, control isn't about strength or power. It's about fear. Fear that things will fall apart. Fear that you'll lose yourself. Fear that if you let go for even a second, everything will come crashing down. And that fear? It's deeply rooted in wounds. Wounds that tell you that the world isn't safe, that people can't be trusted, and that if you don't have everything under control, you'll be left alone to deal with the consequences. So you take control in the only way you know how, by holding everything together, by micromanaging, by becoming hyper-aware of every little thing in your life. For me, it was the need to control my surroundings. I'd make sure everything was perfect before I allowed myself to relax. My workspace had to be spotless. My plans had to be precise. My relationships had to be harmonious. The problem was, I never felt like I could truly relax because I was always on guard, always trying to maintain order. I thought that if I could manage every situation, if I could be prepared for every outcome, I wouldn't get hurt. But I wasn't protecting myself from anything. I was simply avoiding the feelings I didn't want to face. The feelings of helplessness, vulnerability, and fear. The more I tried to control everything, the more exhausted I became. And the more I pushed myself to keep the tight grip on every situation, the more I realized I was losing the ability to actually live. I wasn't letting life unfold naturally. I was living in a constant state of tension, of anxiety, of waiting for the next thing to fall apart. And in doing so, I wasn't allowing myself to experience the things that truly mattered: connection, spontaneity, joy. At first, it felt impossible to let go of that need for control. Every part of me screamed that I needed to keep it all in line. But I started to realize something: trying to control everything wasn't protecting me. It was suffocating me. The truth is, control is often a reaction to pain. It's a way to cope with the unpredictability of life and the fear of what might happen if we let go. But what I learned over time is that control isn't the key to avoiding pain, it's just another way of postponing it. When you refuse to let go, when you refuse to face the emotional wounds that are driving your need for control, you keep yourself trapped in a cycle of fear and anxiety. The longer you try to control things, the more your world shrinks, and the more you isolate yourself from what truly matters. So how do you break free from the need for control? The first step is acknowledging that control isn't serving you. It's not keeping you safe. It's just keeping you stuck. You have to admit that, deep down, you're afraid of letting go. You're afraid of what might happen if you stop trying to manage everything. But here's the truth: letting go isn't about surrendering to chaos. It's about surrendering to the unknown, the part of life that you can't control, that you can't predict, but that you can trust. It's about learning to live with uncertainty, knowing that no matter what happens, you will be okay. One thing I started doing was giving myself permission to be imperfect. I stopped trying to manage every detail and started accepting that things didn't always have to be perfect. It wasn't easy at first. I'd find myself slipping back into old habits, trying to control things just to feel like I had a handle on life. But the more I practiced letting go, the more I realized that life doesn't need to be controlled to be beautiful. Sometimes, the most profound moments of connection, joy, and peace come from the times when you let go and just be. Now, when I feel the urge to control, I stop and ask myself, what's really going on here? What am I really afraid of? Often, it's a fear of failure, rejection, or vulnerability. And that's okay. It's normal to feel those things. But I've learned that the more I let go of trying to control every little thing, the more I allow myself to trust in life, to trust in others, and most importantly, to trust in myself. The truth is, control is a defense mechanism. It's a shield you put up to protect yourself from emotional pain. But the more you hold on to it, the more you separate yourself from life's flow. The more you try to control everything, the less space you leave for joy, spontaneity, and the kind of experiences that help you heal. You can't grow if you're holding on too tight. You can't heal if you're constantly guarding yourself from what's uncomfortable. So the next time you feel the urge to control, take a breath. Ask yourself what you're really afraid of. And then let go. Trust that you can face whatever comes your way, without needing to manage every outcome. Because life isn't about control. It's about freedom. Freedom to be imperfect. Freedom to feel. Freedom to let things unfold naturally. Letting go isn't giving up. It's giving yourself permission to live fully, without the fear of what might happen. And once you do that, you'll find that the world isn't as chaotic as you think. It's just waiting for you to trust it. Let's talk about the stories we tell ourselves. We all have them, right? Those narratives that run in the background of our minds, shaping the way we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. These stories are powerful, and in many ways, they define the life we live. The problem is, we often don't realize how deeply these stories are rooted in our wounds. We carry these narratives with us, believing them to be truths, even when they're based on old, unhealed pain. I've spent a lot of my life living in the story of, "I'm not enough." It's a story I didn't consciously choose, but it was the one that shaped everything I did. It dictated my relationships, my career choices, and the way I saw myself in the world. Every time I faced a challenge, my mind would tell me, "See? This is why you're not good enough. This is why you're always going to fail." And every time I made a mistake, it reinforced that belief. The narrative of unworthiness kept me stuck, trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and fear, and I didn't even realize it was happening. Ready for the curveball, the story you tell yourself isn't always true. In fact, it's often a distorted version of reality, shaped by past experiences, pain, and emotional wounds that have never been fully addressed. And the more you tell yourself that story, the more it becomes your truth. But here's the good news: just because you've been telling yourself a story for years doesn't mean it's permanent. You can change the narrative. The first step in changing your story is recognizing it for what it is, a story. When you begin to see that the way you've been thinking about yourself isn't a universal truth, you start to gain power over it. That story isn't the real you. It's a collection of past experiences, beliefs, and fears, but it doesn't define who you are now or who you can become. For me, it took a long time to see how much my story was controlling my life. I didn't know it at the time, but my belief that I wasn't enough was driving every decision I made. It affected how I showed up in relationships, how I handled failure, and how I approached success. I'd often sabotage my own achievements because deep down, I didn't believe I deserved them. Every time something went well, I'd find a way to ruin it because the narrative I'd been living by told me I wasn't worthy of good things. But once I recognized that my story wasn't the truth, everything started to shift. It wasn't a magic moment, but it was a moment of clarity. I started to challenge the negative beliefs I had about myself. I asked myself, is this belief serving me? And when I realized it wasn't, I started rewriting the story. Rewriting your story isn't easy, though. It requires vulnerability, courage, and a willingness to confront the painful beliefs you've been carrying around for so long. It means looking at the wounds that have shaped your beliefs and healing them. It means replacing the old narrative with a new one that empowers you, rather than keeps you stuck in the past. But here's something I've learned: rewriting your story doesn't mean you have to erase the past. It means accepting it for what it was, acknowledging how it shaped you, and choosing to move forward. It means taking control of the narrative, instead of letting your wounds control you. And that, my friends, is where true freedom lies. Think about it: the stories we tell ourselves often stem from the way we've been treated by others, whether it's neglect, criticism, or abandonment. Those experiences leave marks on us, but they don't define us. The story you've been telling yourself about being not enough or unworthy might have been true at one point in your life, but that doesn't mean it's true now. It's a story you've outgrown, even if it hasn't stopped running in your mind. When you tell yourself a story over and over, it actually creates neural pathways in your brain. These pathways become stronger the more you repeat the story, which makes it harder to change. But the good news is that your brain is plastic, meaning it can change, adapt, and create new pathways. The more you challenge your old narrative, the more you build new pathways that reflect a healthier, more empowering story. This isn't a quick fix, it's a process. But with time, you'll start to see your behavior, your choices, and even your feelings shift as your story changes. One of the things that helped me rewrite my story was learning to replace the "I'm not enough" story with the affirmation that I am worthy. It wasn't about saying it once and expecting a miracle. It was about saying it every day, even when I didn't believe it. And over time, I began to see evidence of my worthiness in the way I treated myself, the relationships I attracted, and the opportunities that came my way. The more I leaned into the new story, the more my life began to reflect it. This is a process that requires self-compassion and patience. You're not going to flip a switch and change your narrative overnight. But every time you catch yourself telling the old story, you have the opportunity to reframe it. When you catch yourself thinking, "I'm not enough," challenge that thought with something like, "I am enough, just as I am." And the more you practice, the easier it becomes to shift the story. The beauty of rewriting your story is that it allows you to step into the life you've always wanted. It allows you to choose a new narrative based on your strengths, your values, and your potential, rather than the limitations of your past. So start today, start by identifying the stories that no longer serve you, and then create a new one. You're the author of your life. It's time to write a better chapter. You ever get that feeling where you're on the verge of doing something important, something that could change the trajectory of your life, and then, just before you take that step, you freeze? Like there's a wall right in front of you, and no matter how hard you push, you just can't seem to get past it. I've been there more times than I can count. And here's the kicker, every single time I hit that wall, I thought it was because I wasn't ready. I'd convince myself that the timing wasn't right, that I needed more preparation, or that I wasn't qualified enough to take the leap. But the truth? The truth was that I was afraid. Deep down, I was terrified of failure, of rejection, of not being enough. And that fear? That fear was directly linked to my wounds, specifically, my fear of not being worthy. For the longest time, I believed that if I wasn't perfect, if I didn't have all the answers, then I wasn't worth taking a risk for. I thought that success was something I had to earn by being flawless, by being above reproach, by being the right kind of person. So, when the opportunity came knocking, I'd freeze. I'd start second-guessing myself, start analyzing all the possible ways things could go wrong. And ultimately, I'd back away from it. What I didn't realize was that my fear of failure wasn't just about the failure itself, it was about the fear of confirming the story I'd been telling myself for years, that I wasn't worthy of success, that I didn't deserve to be seen, that I wasn't good enough. But what I've learned since then is this: fear is normal. Fear is a part of the process. It's not something that signals that you're not ready, it's a sign that you're about to do something that requires growth, something that stretches you beyond your comfort zone. And when that fear pops up, that's the moment when you know you're on the edge of something big. The reason we feel that fear is because we're facing a challenge that threatens our sense of safety. And that's where the healing happens, it's when we step forward despite the fear. It's when we show up anyway, imperfect, uncertain, vulnerable, and take that first step, even when every part of us is screaming, "What if I fail?" Because here's the truth, failure isn't the end. It's a part of the journey. And if you're not failing, if you're not stumbling, if you're not facing that fear, you're not growing. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It happens when you're willing to embrace the discomfort, to sit with the fear, and to move forward anyway. I've learned to see fear not as something to avoid, but as a signal that I'm about to do something important. Every time that wall appears, I ask myself, what's on the other side of this fear? What could I achieve if I allowed myself to feel the fear and move through it instead of backing down? And every time I've taken the leap, even when I didn't feel ready, I've been amazed by the results. But it wasn't just about taking the leap, it was about how I started to see myself in relation to that fear. For so long, I thought fear meant weakness. I thought that if I was scared, I wasn't brave enough. But now I see it differently. I see fear as a companion, not an enemy. I see it as a sign that I'm pushing the boundaries of who I am, and that's where the real transformation begins. And here's the thing, you're never going to feel ready. That's the biggest myth we tell ourselves. There's no perfect moment when everything aligns, when the stars are in the right position, and when you're 100% confident in the outcome. That's a fantasy. The reality is that you'll always feel a bit unprepared, always feel a little unsure, but that's what makes it real. That's what makes it worth it. This is where your psychological wounds can actually become your strength. When you're faced with fear, the urge to shrink, the impulse to back away, it's the moment to confront the old beliefs that have been holding you back. It's the chance to rewrite the story that says, "I'm not enough," and replace it with one that says, "I am capable of handling whatever comes my way." You've survived your wounds. You've made it through the hard stuff. And now, you get to step into something new, something greater. Take a moment to think about it. How many times have you held yourself back because you were afraid? Afraid of what others would think, afraid of what you might lose, afraid of failing. And how many times has that fear been rooted in an old wound, one that says you're not worthy of the success, the love, or the life you've been dreaming of? When you look at it like that, you start to see that the wall in front of you isn't as solid as it seems. It's made of old beliefs, old wounds, old stories. And when you realize that, you can break through it. You can step forward, not because you have all the answers, but because you trust yourself enough to try. This brings me to another concept I've been reflecting on lately, the paradox of control. The more we try to control the outcome, the more we prevent ourselves from fully experiencing the process. When we hold on too tight, when we try to steer every detail, we rob ourselves of the magic that happens in the uncertainty. Because the truth is, you can't control everything. But you can trust yourself to handle whatever comes your way. That's where the power lies. It's all about uncertainty and trust. Other bees follow the dance, trust that the path will lead to something good, and they take action. They don't control every detail, but they trust the process, and they trust the message. That's exactly what we need to do when we face our fears: trust the process, trust the discomfort, and trust that we're exactly where we need to be. So, the next time you hit that wall, the next time fear shows up, ask yourself, what would happen if I moved through it instead of backing away? You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to take the next step, trusting that the path will unfold as you go. Because on the other side of that fear is everything you've been waiting for. We've all heard it before: you need to love yourself first. It's everywhere, right? The self-love movement is booming. Everyone's talking about it, posting affirmations, and shouting from the rooftops about how crucial it is. And, in theory, it sounds great. But here's the thing: I didn't get it for a long time. I thought self-love was just a trendy term, a nice thing to say, but not something that was actually going to change my life. That is, until I realized something crucial. Self-love isn't about pampering yourself with bubble baths or buying a bunch of self-help books, although both of those are lovely, to be honest. It's about showing up for yourself, day in and day out, especially when you don't want to. It's about being your own advocate, your own cheerleader, when the world isn't offering you that. It's about recognizing that you're worthy of the same care and kindness that you give to everyone else. And for me, that was a game changer. For years, I was busy giving love to everyone else: my friends, my family, my colleagues, even strangers. But when it came time to turn that same love and care back on myself, I was terrible at it. I was so wrapped up in proving my worth to others that I didn't take a second to ask, why do I deserve love? Why do I deserve care? And the scariest part of it? I didn't even know how to answer those questions. This lack of self-love showed up in so many areas of my life. I didn't speak up for myself when I needed to. I allowed people to treat me in ways that I knew weren't healthy, simply because I didn't believe I deserved better. I kept quiet when I should have set boundaries, and I let my emotional needs go unmet for far too long. And when I felt down or unworthy, I didn't give myself the space to feel those emotions. I brushed them aside, telling myself that I didn't have the time for it, or that other people's needs were more important. The turning point came when I realized something startling: the way I treated myself was a direct reflection of the wounds I had never healed. I wasn't showing myself love because I didn't believe I deserved it. Deep down, I thought I had to earn love, that I wasn't worthy of it simply for existing. And the worst part? That belief had been driving my behavior for years. But here's the thing about self-love: you don't have to earn it. You just are worthy of it. And once I understood that, everything changed. I began to see that my inability to love myself wasn't a flaw, it was a wound that had been carried from my past, an emotional injury that needed to be healed. Once I realized that, I could begin the work of changing how I viewed myself and, by extension, how I treated myself. Self-love doesn't mean ignoring your flaws or pretending that everything is perfect. It means accepting yourself as you are, without the need for validation or external approval. It means showing yourself compassion, even when you fail, when you mess up, when you're not living up to your own standards. It means forgiving yourself for the things you've done or haven't done, and giving yourself permission to be human. For me, this looked like starting small. I had to unlearn years of negative self-talk and replace it with something kinder. Whenever I'd catch myself thinking, "I'm not good enough," I'd stop and correct it, "I am enough, just as I am." And I didn't let myself off the hook. I didn't let myself slide back into old patterns of self-criticism and self-doubt. I had to actively choose love over judgment, care over criticism. And while it was difficult at first, with time, it became easier. Human intelligence fact of the day: studies have shown that practicing self-compassion can activate the brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for feelings of safety and reward. Essentially, when you practice kindness toward yourself, your brain rewards you by reinforcing positive, healing neural pathways. This means that the more you practice self-love, the easier it gets, and the more your brain begins to trust that you are worthy of care. But here's the thing that truly shifted everything for me: once I started showing myself love, I stopped looking for it outside of myself. I realized that I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel worthy. I didn't need external validation to prove I was valuable. I had been seeking that love and approval in all the wrong places, through people, through success, through achievements, when what I truly needed was to give it to myself. Once I did that, everything else followed. My relationships became healthier. My confidence grew. My decisions became more aligned with who I truly was, not who I thought I should be. When you love yourself, you stop tolerating things that don't align with your worth. You stop accepting poor treatment from others. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. And when you stop tolerating things that go against your self-worth, the people around you start respecting you more. They start seeing you as someone who values themselves, and they mirror that respect right back at you. The beauty of self-love is that it's not about perfection, it's about acceptance. It's about recognizing that you are worthy of love, not because of anything you do, but simply because you exist. You are enough, exactly as you are. And when you start believing that, when you start treating yourself with the love and care you deserve, you will begin to heal. You'll begin to release the old wounds, the old stories, and the old fears. And with that, you'll step into a life that's not about proving anything to anyone, but about being authentically you. So the next time you catch yourself in that negative self-talk or thinking that you're not enough, remember this: you are worthy of love, your own love. And once you truly start giving it to yourself, everything will start to change. Have you ever found yourself looking back on a situation, something that didn't go the way you'd hoped, and thinking, "Why did I do that? Why did I choose that?" The answers are usually pretty simple: because of a wound you haven't healed yet. We often make decisions that seem rational in the moment, but when you look at them from a wider perspective, you start to see the patterns. You realize that the choices you've made aren't just about the present, they're reflections of your past. They're guided by wounds you haven't fully processed. I used to think I was making decisions based on what I wanted, but as I started to really dig into my own behavior, I began to see that many of my choices were driven by unconscious fears and beliefs. I'd avoid confrontation because I was afraid of rejection. I'd overextend myself for others because deep down, I didn't feel worthy of being loved unless I was constantly giving. I'd keep toxic people in my life because I was terrified of being alone, even though I knew it wasn't healthy. And the worst part? I was unaware of how deeply these unhealed wounds were influencing my decisions. It's like living with blinders on, choosing based on old beliefs, habits, and fears, not even realizing I was repeating the same patterns over and over again. It wasn't until I started connecting the dots between my past emotional wounds and the choices I was making that I began to understand how deeply those wounds were shaping my life. The reality is, our wounds affect everything we do: how we choose our friends, partners, careers, and even how we view our worth. If you've ever stayed in a job you hate because you're afraid of failure, or you've kept people in your life who treat you badly because you don't feel worthy of better, you've seen how this plays out. The choices we make, especially the ones that don't serve us, are often tied to old, unhealed wounds that we haven't dealt with. I've come to learn that healing those wounds requires more than just acknowledging them. It requires changing the way we make decisions, taking a hard look at the fears and beliefs that guide our choices, and challenging them. It's not enough to say, "I'm aware of my wounds," and expect things to shift. Healing happens when we take conscious action to make choices that align with our worth, not our past pain. It starts with understanding the wound itself. Where did it come from? When did it first show up? What belief did it create in you? For me, one of the biggest wounds I had to face was the belief that I wasn't worthy of success unless I was perfect. I would sabotage my own progress because I was terrified of failing and proving that I wasn't enough. But once I recognized that fear, I was able to start questioning it. I asked myself, why do I believe this? And once I did, I realized it was an old belief, one that no longer served me. The next step was challenging those beliefs with actions. If I believed I wasn't worthy of success unless I was perfect, I had to intentionally do things that didn't require perfection. I had to allow myself to make mistakes, fail, and still show up. I had to prove to myself that my worth wasn't tied to how well I performed. It was tied to who I am, just as I am. That wasn't easy. It took time. But as I started challenging those old beliefs, I began to make different choices. I began choosing things that aligned with my healing, not my fear. And here's where the magic happens. Once you start making choices based on the new beliefs you're creating, you begin to see new possibilities. You begin to attract new experiences. You start making decisions that are aligned with your growth, not your past. You choose love over fear. You choose courage over safety. You choose authenticity over perfection. Here's an interesting fact: our brains are wired to reinforce patterns. Every time you make a decision based on a certain belief, your brain strengthens that neural pathway. The more you believe something, the more your brain makes it feel like the truth. But the good news is this: you have the power to change those neural pathways. Every time you make a decision that contradicts an old belief, you're creating new patterns in your brain. You're rewiring your thoughts, actions, and behaviors to align with who you want to be, not who you were. For example, every time I chose to put myself first, every time I set a boundary, or said no when I wanted to, was a small act of healing. And eventually, those small acts built up. They created a new pattern, one where I could stand firm in my worth, regardless of what anyone else thought or did. The process of healing our wounds and changing our choices isn't about erasing the past. It's about understanding how the past shaped us and then choosing to live from a place of self-love and growth, instead of fear and limitation. It's about recognizing the wounds without letting them dictate our future. But difficult, sometimes, healing feels like you're not getting anywhere. You take one step forward, and then 2 steps back. The wounds don't disappear overnight, and the old patterns still creep in. But the key is consistency. The key is showing up for yourself every single day, making the conscious decision to live from a place of healing, not fear. And the more you do it, the more the healing becomes real. Did you know that baby elephants suck their trunks for comfort, just like human babies suck their thumbs? It's a soothing mechanism, a way for them to feel safe and loved. It's interesting how both humans and animals have similar ways of self-soothing, especially when they're vulnerable or in need of comfort. And just like that baby elephant, when we face our wounds, we need to learn to comfort ourselves in healthy ways, by choosing healing, by choosing love, and by choosing to show up for ourselves in ways that reflect our worth. The more you choose the path of healing, the more your choices will reflect who you truly are. You'll begin to see that you no longer need to be driven by your wounds, but by your growth. The decisions you make from this place won't be motivated by fear or limitation, they'll be guided by your strength, your worth, and your potential. So, the next time you feel yourself getting stuck in an old pattern or making a choice that doesn't align with who you want to be, ask yourself, what wound is guiding this decision? And then, challenge that decision. Choose differently. Choose the healing. Choose the growth. Because your wounds may have shaped your past, but they don't have to shape your future. Have you ever noticed how we sometimes settle for things in life? Settling is such a sneaky thing. It often disguises itself as acceptance or contentment, when in reality, it's a way of avoiding the discomfort of change. It's when you settle into a job you're not passionate about because it's safe. Or when you stay in a relationship that isn't fulfilling because it feels easier than facing the unknown. You tell yourself, it's fine, or I can live with this, but deep down, you know you're not truly living the life you deserve. You're just existing. I've done it. I've settled for relationships, careers, and situations that I knew didn't align with who I was. And I told myself I was fine. I convinced myself that this was just what life was, mundane, safe, predictable. But I also felt the quiet ache, the yearning for more, the sense that I was holding myself back. I didn't realize it at the time, but settling wasn't about being content with what I had. It was about not believing that I deserved more. I had this story running in the background of my mind: you're lucky to have what you have. Don't ask for more. You're not worth more. And this story dictated everything I did. Every time I saw an opportunity for something bigger, better, or more aligned with my true desires, that story would kick in. Who do you think you are? You don't deserve that kind of success or happiness. And I'd shrink. I'd settle. But the problem with settling is that it doesn't just affect one area of your life, it bleeds into everything. It affects how you view yourself, how you treat others, and how you show up in the world. It's like living in a box that you built yourself, and while you're inside it, you convince yourself that the walls are fine. But the truth is, you built those walls to keep yourself safe, to avoid the pain of rejection, failure, or disappointment. The problem is, that box doesn't allow you to expand, to grow, or to fully experience the joy and freedom that life has to offer. When I started paying attention to the times I was settling, I realized something important: I was afraid of disappointment. I was afraid that if I reached for something more, I might fail. And in that failure, I would confirm my deepest fear, that I wasn't worthy of having what I wanted, that I wasn't enough. But the truth is, I was never going to know my full potential if I kept choosing safety over risk, comfort over growth, settling over striving. And that's the real danger of settling: it's a form of self-sabotage. It's when you stop believing in your own worth and convince yourself that where you are is good enough, when deep down, you know it's not. It's when you stop dreaming, stop hoping, and stop reaching for the things that scare you. And what happens when you stop reaching for more? You stop living fully. You stop growing. But here's the thing: you are worthy of more. You are worthy of happiness, success, love, and peace. Your wounds may have convinced you otherwise, but that's not the truth. The truth is, you are more than your past. You are more than the mistakes you've made or the failures you've experienced. You are worthy simply because you exist. And the moment you realize that, the moment you stop settling, everything starts to shift. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that I was the only one holding myself back. No one else was preventing me from achieving the life I wanted. It was my own beliefs, my own fears, and my own wounds that were keeping me in that box. And it wasn't until I started challenging those beliefs, until I stopped accepting the limits I had imposed on myself, that I began to step into my true potential. Let's get real: the only thing standing between you and the life you want is the decision to stop settling. It's the decision to acknowledge your wounds, to understand where they come from, and to choose to heal them. It's the decision to embrace discomfort, to lean into uncertainty, and to trust that you are capable of handling whatever comes your way. Because you are. And the more you step into that truth, the more you start to see the possibilities. That's what settling does: it keeps you stuck in the same shell. But once you shed it, once you allow yourself to feel the discomfort and embrace the unknown, that's when you grow. That's when you expand into the person you were always meant to be. I used to think that growth was something I had to earn, something I had to prove I was worthy of. But I've come to understand that growth is a natural process. It's part of being human. And the only thing holding me back was my own willingness to embrace it. So, if you're settling, whether it's in your career, your relationships, or the way you view yourself, ask yourself this: what am I afraid of? What is it that's holding you back? Is it fear of failure? Fear of rejection? Fear of not being good enough? And then, ask yourself, what would happen if I chose differently? What would happen if you stopped settling and started striving, if you allowed yourself to dream bigger, to reach further, to embrace your worth? Because you are worthy. You are worthy of the life you want. You are worthy of love, success, joy, and everything you desire. And the moment you stop settling for less than you deserve is the moment your whole life starts to change. You are not meant to stay small. You are not meant to live in a box you created for yourself. You are meant to grow, to evolve, and to live the life you've always dreamed of. And you can start right now, by making the decision to stop settling and start striving. You know, we're all walking around carrying a heavy load. It's different for everyone, maybe it's shame, maybe it's guilt, maybe it's unprocessed grief, but we all have something. And here's the kicker: we often don't even realize how much this emotional baggage is affecting us until we get honest about it. It wasn't until I started looking at my own emotional wounds that I realized how much of my life had been shaped by them. I'd spent so much time avoiding the things that hurt, convincing myself I didn't need to feel it, that I never gave myself the space to really process it. But what I've learned is that you can only carry that weight for so long before it begins to wear you down. The emotional baggage we carry shows up in the choices we make. It's in the relationships we choose, the way we show up in our careers, the way we treat ourselves. If we don't address the wounds that shape us, we keep repeating the same patterns, dragging that heavy load with us wherever we go. And it's not always obvious, either. You might not be consciously aware of the emotional weight you're carrying, but it still affects you. It shows up in your reactions to stress, in how you respond to conflict, in how you treat yourself when things don't go the way you want them to. It's like a shadow that follows you around, only you don't always see it. But it's there, and it's guiding your behavior in ways you might not even recognize. For me, the emotional weight I carried showed up in my fear of failure. I'd been taught, in many ways, that making mistakes was a reflection of my worth, that failure meant I wasn't enough. So I became terrified of it. But that fear wasn't just about not wanting to fail, it was about avoiding the pain of facing my own sense of inadequacy. It was about protecting myself from the wounds I hadn't fully healed. And so, I would settle, or I would hold back, or I would sabotage my own success because I couldn't face the possibility of not being perfect. But as I started doing the work of addressing those wounds, I realized something important: failure isn't the enemy. It's a natural part of growth. And more importantly, it's not a reflection of my worth. I'm not defined by the mistakes I make, but by how I respond to them. The way we treat failure says everything about how we view ourselves. If you see failure as a confirmation that you're not good enough, you'll avoid it at all costs. But if you see failure as a learning experience, as a way to grow and evolve, then it loses its power over you. When we refuse to face the emotional wounds that hold us back, we live in fear. We live in avoidance. We live in the past, instead of moving forward into the future we deserve. And that's where the real healing begins: when you face your wounds, when you stop avoiding them and start processing them, that's when you can let go of the emotional weight that's been dragging you down. It's like cleaning out a closet that's been stuffed with old clothes, books, and things you no longer need. You don't just stuff it all back in once it's cleared out, you make space for the new, the better, the more aligned. That's exactly what emotional healing is like. It's about clearing out the things you no longer need, those old stories, those past hurts, and making space for new, healthier beliefs and behaviors. And the best part? You don't have to do it all at once. Healing isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes time. You'll have setbacks, you'll stumble, and that's okay. The key is to keep going. Every time you face a wound, every time you challenge the beliefs that have been holding you back, you're getting closer to being the person you were always meant to be. The person who isn't afraid of failure. The person who knows their worth, regardless of what happens. The person who is free to live without the weight of unhealed wounds holding them back. There's a saying I love, what you resist, persists. And it's true. When you keep resisting your wounds, they continue to show up, over and over again, in different ways. But when you stop resisting and start facing them, they begin to lose their power. They no longer control you. You control them. The key to emotional healing is acceptance, not just accepting what happened, but accepting yourself, in all your imperfect, human glory. The emotional baggage doesn't define you. The things you've been through don't define you. You get to define who you are, how you show up, and what you're willing to accept. And once you start doing that, you begin to see the emotional weight start to lift. It doesn't happen overnight, but little by little, you'll feel lighter. And the more you heal, the more space you make for the things you truly deserve, peace, joy, and the freedom to live life on your own terms. Let me leave you with this: your wounds are not a curse. They are simply a part of your story, and they have made you who you are today. But they do not have to define your future. You have the power to heal. You have the power to rewrite the story. And you have the power to live a life that is free from the emotional baggage of the past. Take it one step at a time. Let go of the weight. And embrace the future that's waiting for you,